Please be seated. I want to tell you about the great tadpole rescue of 1997. Yes, I said tadpoles. Little baby frogs. You know what tadpoles are. Well, in 1997, I was a college kid. And though I don't look like much of a runner, I tried really hard to be a runner in college. I was a trail runner, and I liked to run through the woods. The muddier the trail, the more dangerous the trail, the happier I was. And so in the spring of 1997, we had a long, wet winter. So the trails were really muddy. And I'd come home splattered with mud, my shoes caked with mud. And it was glorious. There was a big, wet, kind of sinkhole spot by the side of the trail in the woods. And one day I saw the most amazing thing. It was so amazing that I stopped running and I bent down to look at it. There were frog eggs by the side of this big, wet, muddy puddle. And so the next day I stopped and looked at them again. And every day as I was on my run, I checked on the progress of the frog eggs that soon became tadpoles swimming in the puddle. Well, the wet winter led into a rather hot, dry spring, and every day the puddle shrank. And what went from a big, mucky mess finally was down to just about this big. More tadpoles than water, and only about as deep as a tadpole. And it was then that I sprang into action. I went back to my dormitory and told the other girls on the third floor, we've got to save the tadpoles. So we gathered some containers. One girl's goldfish had died over Christmas break because she'd left it alone in the dorm. So we had one goldfish bowl. And we had several Tupperware containers that had arrived from our mothers filled with cookies in care packages. So they took some containers and the goldfish bowl and went to the lake all the way on the other side of campus to get dirty water. We knew we couldn't put tadpoles in tap water because tadpoles don't need fluoride. They don't have teeth. So we knew that if we put them in tap water, they would die. They needed dirty, nasty water. So the girls went to the lake to get the dirty, nasty water, and I took Tupperware to the woods, and I saved the tadpoles. I got every last tadpole into that Tupperware, and I went back to the third floor, and we divvied them up. We put water in every container, we put some tadpoles in every container, and we all took them back to our rooms. We were ridiculously excited about these tadpoles. All these girls who were far from our siblings and our pets had extra love to give. And we were willing to lavish that extra love on tadpoles. We shared notes about whether they're growing their little legs. We shared notes about how big they were getting. And soon we shared notes about what else was growing in the dirty water. We noticed other things moving in there. I'll note right here that none of us were biology majors. I think on the third floor, there were just like artists and musicians and historians. The biology majors all must have been on the second floor because we were surprised when little things started to squiggle in the water. And the great tadpole rescue of 1997 soon became the great mosquito plague of 1997 as our dorm was full of mosquitoes. So we had to evacuate the tadpoles and the mosquitoes, and we went and dumped them in the lake as fast as we could. I tell you this story because our readings today are about life and death. And I want you to be thinking about habitats, places that make life possible. We weren't biologists, but we knew enough that tadpoles need kind of dirty, brackish water in order to live. That's their habitat. It also happens to be the habitat of mosquito eggs and mosquito larvae. You know that if I gave you a panda to care for, you would need to give it bamboo. Or if I gave you a penguin, you would need to keep it cold. We don't need to be scientists to know a little bit that each creature needs specific things in order to live and thrive and flourish. So today, when we're talking about life, I want to ask, what is your natural habitat? Our psalm says, "My soul shall live for the Lord." And we see what that looks like in the example of Abraham. Abraham who falls on his face before God. Abraham who hopes beyond hope. Abraham whose faith doesn't lag behind. His soul lives for God. But we could just as easily say his soul lives in God. That our soul's habitat is God. But before we go any further, I think we should circle back and talk about soul. Talk about that word. Because in 1997, when I was busy saving tadpoles, I was also busy being saved. 1997 was when I was deciding what I believed. Who was God to me? Did the church have anything to do with my life? And one of the things I noticed about church was that preachers would use words like soul and faith and hope and sin and never ever give me a definition that I could grab onto. So I'm not going to assume that we don't have anybody in here that isn't on their very beginning of their walk with Christ. So what do I mean when I'm talking about soul? I mean the part of you that's capable of love. The part of you that is inclined to mercy. The part of you that yearns for justice. The part of you that has goodness in it. The little piece of you that you might call your true self. The little piece of you that wants to connect with God. That's what I'm talking about when I talk about soul. And as we're talking in a group, you might say, oh, my heart, or my mind, or my conscience, or my true self. And every time you said one of those words, I'd translate in my mind, that's a soul. You're talking about your soul. The part of you that yearns for eternity and knows what it means to love. So when we say our souls live for God, our souls live in God, we're talking about the part of us that acts like God acts. Our soul's natural habitat is God. Our natural habitat is God. God in whom we live and move and have our being, as Scripture says. We are not capable of living and being apart from God. God is our habitat. When NASA scientists look at other planets, they talk about the Goldilocks zone. Do you know about this? The Goldilocks zone are planets that are neither too cold nor too hot for life. You know about Goldilocks, the little girl that invaded the bear house and ate all their porridge up. Some porridge was too hot, some porridge was too cold, and she found some porridge that was just right. And so scientists talk about the Goldilocks zone when they're talking about whether planets are too far away or too close to their sun. They're talking about planets that are just the right temperature that they might have liquid water. They might host the kind of life we observe here on Earth. The Goldilocks zone. The place in which life can occur. The place in which we can live and thrive. God is our Goldilocks zone. Our life is hidden in Christ, and Christ's life is in us. That's what we do right here at this altar. We remind ourselves that we can't live apart from God. That a little piece of God's very life is in us, and our life is hidden with Christ and God. The thing is, everything that lives and moves and has breath in its lungs only has life because God is life. So we're faced with a problem. What do Christians do when our souls feel like they're outside the Goldilocks zone? What do Christians do when our souls feel like they're dying? Do you know what that feels like? I think most Christians who have been Christians for a while know what it feels like when you have a dark night of the soul. When your soul, which was once hopeful and faithful, easy, quick to love, feels like it's cold and hard and fearful. And it can be easy, it can be tempting on those days to say, oh, God is far, far away. God has turned his face from me. My soul feels like a fish out of water. So God must be far, far away. But that's temptation. That is viewing life from the human point of view, like Peter does in today's gospel, and not the divine point of view. I think it's natural in our spiritual lives that we sometimes have these times when we feel like our souls are struggling. But the mistake we make is thinking that that has anything to do with the absence of God. Because we cannot exist apart from God. We cannot breathe or live or move or have our being apart from God. We might turn our faces away. We might turn our backs on our Creator. We might harden our hearts so that we can't feel the warmth of the light of Christ. But God never, ever leaves us. God is our Goldilocks zone. God is the habitat of our souls. Nothing we do can be apart from the love of God. So what do we do? What do we do if today you're having one of those times when your soul feels like it's struggling? What do you do when you have a friend or a loved one or the person in the seat next to you that's having one of those days? You change your point of view. You start to look at things from God's point of view instead of your own. And God's point of view doesn't require any $50 words. And it doesn't require you to read another book or be an expert. God's point of view on you, I think, might be best summed up in a song I learned when I was very, very little. And you might know too. And I warn you, I'm a terrible singer, but I'm going to sing it anyway. So if you don't want to hear me, maybe you should chime in and kind of like drown me out. But I'm telling you, if you want to make the shift from the human point of view to the divine point of view, it might be as simple as remembering that God's got the whole world in his hands. He's got the whole wide world in his hands. He's got the whole world in his hands. He's got the whole world in his hands. He's got the mothers and the babies in his hands. He's got the mosquitoes and the tadpoles. In his hands, he's got the people and the priests. In his hands, he's got the whole world in his hands. You are loved by your Creator, and that will never come to an end. God holds your soul in his hands, and that is good news.